All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's BIOMES talk. My name is Brandon Lewis. I'm a first-year PhD student here at Yale School of the Environment. I'm also a part of the BIOMES committee. BIOMES stands for Bridging Issues and Optimizing Methods for Environmental Science. BIOMES is YSE's flagship seminar series hosted by the Dean's Office and facilitated by a committee of students and staff. So the intention of this series is to bring cutting edge research and new ideas to the YSE community. So before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to get through some housekeeping. So first, I would like to remind everyone that BIOMES is a community source, and we're always looking for new speakers and new ideas for our BIOMES series. So if you have any suggestions, you can submit your suggestions by using the QR code that's on the screen. And I think they can see that on Zoom as well. You can use this QR code. And also, you can also email us at BIOMES, BIOMES .ysc@yale.edu. And also directly after our speaker, we will have a short Q&A session. We'll be hosted here with our live audience and also on Zoom. Anytime during the lecture, if you're on Zoom, you can enter in your questions in the Q&A box. And also at the end, just use the raise your hand function and we'll give you a call. And if you're in the audience, we will just, our facilitators will hand you the mic. So before I introduce the speaker, is there anything else? Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce today's speaker. So we're excited to have Dr. Craig Santos Perez. He's an indigenous Cambodu from the Pacific island of Guam. He received an MFA in creative writing from the University of San Francisco and a PhD in ethnic studies from the University of California, Berkeley. He's a professor of English and an affiliate faculty with the Center for Pacific Island Studies and the Indigenous Politics Program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He's the co-editor of 6 anthologies, including Geopoetics in Practice and Indigenous Pacific Islander Ecoliteratures. He is also the author of live books of poetry and a monograph navigating Cambodu poetry, indigeneity, aesthetics, and decolonization. During 2020 and 2021, he was a Mellon ACLS Scholars and Society Fellow for the project Climate Change, Environmental Poetry, and the Public Humanities in Hawaii. So I would like to welcome Dr. Perez, and thank you for coming.
Afade, aloha, greetings to all of you. Thank you so much, Brandon, for that introduction. Thank you to the BIOMES team and community for having me as part of this speaker series. And thank you for the Yale School of the Environment for the kind support. I had a chance to be interviewed by Yale Climate Connections last year, and so I'm really excited to be zooming into your campus today. Now I am virtual here from Hawaii, so it's 7 a.m. my time, and so I'm glad to be able to wake up and have this conversation with you. And of course, living in Hawaii, I want to acknowledge the Kanaka Oiwi, or Native Hawaiian peoples, as I've been able to stand in solidarity with them and their own struggles for environmental sustainability and decolonization. Now I am going to share my screen. I've prepared a slideshow for part of my talk. All right, so I wanted to today share some of the work I've done in environmental justice space here in the Pacific. And so that'll be the first part of my presentation. And then the second part, I'll share some of my own eco poetry with you. And of course, I invite any questions you might have on any aspect of this presentation or the poetry as well. So as Brandon mentioned, I'm originally from the island of Guam, or what we call Guahan. Guam is a very small island in the Western Pacific. It's about probably an 18-hour flight from Yale if you were to take. There's no direct flight from there, but if you were, it's quite a far ways westward. It's close to just about a couple hours south of Japan, east of the Philippines, and north of Papua New Guinea. Now, I grew up in the central village of Mongmo. You can see the shape of our island here. And it's about maybe 8 miles across and 30 miles long for about 200 square miles in total landmass. Now, Guam has been a US territory since 1898. And the US main strategic interest in maintaining Guam as one of its overseas colonies is for US militarization. And so you can see in the map, all the areas in the red color are actually military bases or other military facilities. So there's an Air Force base in the north, a naval base kind of towards the south, a deep water harbor, and then several military weapons storage facilities. And so that was kind of the context in which I grew up, born and raised in Guam. I lived there till I was 15 years old. And then a recession actually struck the island. Fortunately, my parents lost their jobs. And at that point, they decided that our family would migrate to California, which is where I finished high school and went to college. Now, it was the time when I was a graduate student in San Francisco in 2006, where the US announced its Pacific pivot, a foreign policy turn towards the Pacific, kind of in response to the growing power of China. And Guam's role in this pivot, as you probably guess, is to be what they call the tip of the spear in Asia. And so at that time, the US had proposed a massive military buildup for Guam and for other parts of the Asia Pacific region, which would involve about 8,000 Marines being transferred from Okinawa to Guam, as well as their dependents, tens of thousands of foreign workers to build up the military bases there, a new missile defense system, as well as a live firing range, and then a new Marine Corps base. Now, hearing about this buildup was really frightening to me and many other of my people, not only back home in Guam, but in our diaspora and in California. And so that was really when I first started to become aware of the deeper environmental impacts of US militarism on Guam. But that led me in 2006 to join a Chamorro activist group called Famagsaydsan. And it was a group of Chamorros in California who wanted to raise awareness about these impacts and to protest this new military buildup. And so you can see the poster here as one of the events that we had in San Francisco, a way for us to educate our own people who are living there, but also to create solidarity with other folks who were part of the demilitarization movement in the US. And then also we connected with folks from other US territories like Puerto Rico. And so that activism for me culminated in 2008 when a small group of us traveled to New York City to the United Nations headquarters. And we were able to testify to the fourth committee, which is a special political and decolonization committee that's charged with basically trying to facilitate the decolonization of the last remaining official 17 non-self governing territories in the world. And so for that moment, it was really transformational for me. I delivered a 3-minute testimony focusing on both the legacy and continuing impacts of US militarism on Guam's environment, including massive contamination, the existence of more than a dozen Superfund sites on such a small island, and the kind of exposure that people have had to many chemicals, leading to really high rates of cancer amongst our people and many in my family as well. So that kind of brought me into environmental justice movement kind of through the intersection of US militarization. And so after that United Nations event, I was invited by the Guam Humanities Council in 2010 to come back home and to be part of a project that they organized called 8,000, How Will It Change Our Lives? Community Conversations on the US Military Buildup in Guam. And this was an amazing project they did where I basically performed my poetry at all the public high schools on Guam, as well as the community college and the university. I did several public events, as well as appeared on radio and television. And the way the events went was I would read my poetry about US militarism, and then members of the Humanities Council would facilitate conversations based on the poem, but also addressing the impacts of this buildup on our community. And to me, this was a really profound experience, really emphasizing how we can have civic engagement through the arts, and we can have these difficult conversations with our community, again, through the humanities and through literature. And so this really set me on a path where I kind of continued this work thinking about the relationship between environmental justice, the humanities, and public engagement. And so that next year, I actually moved to Hawaii and accepted a position at the university here in the English department. And Hawaii is very similar to Guam in the sense that it is also colonized by the US. It is very militarized as well. And when I moved here, another aspect of the environmental movement was the growing climate justice movement that really came to the fore around 2014. And so, you know, I kind of joined this movement, got to meet a lot of the leaders here in Hawaii, and then of course also offered my own services as a poet and organizer. And so you can see the top picture was me performing at the end of the Honolulu Climate March, which ended in Waikiki in 2014. The picture on the bottom was from a climate change conference that was organized on our campus, but my part of it was to organize the climate poetry reading. And we had that at the end of the conference, and it was a great event in the sense that, you know, the conference was a couple of days of a lot of scientific and social science presentations, but this reading really opened a space for folks to share their emotions and to really, you know, come together in a different way. And then the last picture is in 2016, the big World Conservation Congress of the IUCN was held here in Hawaii, and I had a chance to be one of the featured performers. And so I also shared some of my poetry at that event. Now, another project that I've been involved with, again, making that connection between literature and environmental justice, is a project called the My Hawaii Story Contest. And this is an annual that we do for middle school students in Hawaii. Basically, every year there's a theme. You can see the picture here is from 2019. The theme was He A'ali'i Ku Makani Au, which translates as resilience in the face of change. And basically, we circulate this theme to a group of participating middle school teachers across the state. And then they give that theme to their students. They do a couple weeks of curriculum and have the students write poetry or prose. And then when the deadline comes, they submit their work to us. and a team of editors. We judge their work, choose the winners of the contest, usually around 20 students. And then we publish their work in a little chapbook that is then distributed to the schools. But one of the best parts of this project is we then invite the students and their families to an event at the big environmental conference here. It's called the Hawaii Conservation Alliance Conference. And it's mostly, of course, scientists, environmentalists, conservation presentations. But here we actually host an eco-poetry reading with these kids, and they get to read their work and receive their prizes, certificates, and of course their flower lays, as you can see. And we usually have a crowd, sometimes around 100 people. And I remember from this particular year, we were scheduled at the same time as the Hawaii governor's speech. And maybe about midway through our reading, a lot of people started coming to our event. And I heard later that they didn't like what the governor had to say about his environmental plan. And so they skipped his event and came to ours, and felt really much more inspired by these kids than by our politicians. So that's a little bit about that project. Another project I do is I offer community writing workshops in collaboration with a nonprofit here called the Pacific Writers Connection. Now, in 2021, because of the pandemic, I taught these courses online, and so they became free Zoom Pacific Eco Poetry writing workshops. You could see that each of the weeks that we had a workshop, we had a different theme. And so sometimes we would write about, excuse me, creation stories, ocean and waterscapes, or human-animal relations. And what's great about these workshops is, I have the students read a little bit, and then they do their own writing. We offer each other feedback, and through that, we kind of, see what everyone is feeling and thinking about these environmental issues. Now, what was interesting, even though I was disappointed over the pandemic to have it be online, what ended up being great about the Zoom format is that we had a lot of people join us actually from outside Hawaii. So we had folks from Aotearoa, New Zealand, Australia, Fiji, Guam, the Philippines, India, Hong Kong, the US, and Canada, all joined in these workshops. And so even though they were reading, some of the Pacific literature that I assigned, they were also able to write from their own places. And there are a lot of interconnections that we saw between what was happening in India, for example, to what's happening here in Hawaii. Now here at the university, I also developed and now it's kind of one of my signature classes called Eco Poetry workshops. And these are workshops I've been teaching maybe for about 7-8 years now, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And it's a class where, similar to the workshops in the community, where we read works of literature and then we write our own original poetry based on those themes. And then the students, of course, will give each other peer feedback, we'll do revisions. But then also what's fun about the course, I'll usually have some kind of other environmental components. Here in this picture, you see we invited a weaver to teach us how to weave coconut fronds. We've also do a lot of excursions in the class. So we'll actually go to the beach when we're writing about the beach, or go on a hike one time if we're writing about the mountains, for example. And so it's a really fun workshop to teach. The students really love it, and it's a great space for them, not only to learn about environmental issues, but then of course to also express their own feelings and thoughts about the changing climate, which, here in the Pacific, it's really, you always notice we had really hot weather the past couple of years, increased storms, and so on. And out of this class, I ended up writing a pedagogy essay called On Teaching Eco-Poetry in a Time of Climate Change. And for those educators out there, in case you're interested, You could actually read this essay for free online. It was published in the Georgia Review in 2020, and then republished in this anthology called This Impermanent Earth, Environmental Writing from the Georgia Review. And I just wanted to plug this anthology because it's really great for those of you who might be interested in environmental writing. All right, so one thing about the course, as I was teaching it, I was lucky because there are a lot of eco poetry anthologies that have been published in the last couple of years. But unfortunately, most of them do not contain that much, if at all, of Pacific literature. And so, in my classes, I would usually just photocopy or scan Pacific literature to share with my students. And so what I wanted to do is actually to really have an anthology of our own. And so I was able to team up with two of my former graduate students, Kathy Jetno-Kijner and Leora Kava. And since 2016, we've been editing this anthology called Indigenous Pacific Islander Eco-Literatures. And I'm happy to share it's coming out this year in August, finally, from the University of Hawaii Press. It features over 100 Pacific Islander authors. It includes poetry, fiction, nonfiction, chant, some visual text, and it's about 300 pages. So it's a substantial anthology, and I'm excited that I finally have this work where I can now assign it in my class as our course text. And I wanted to share it with you also in case any of you are interested in Pacific eco-literature. All right, so besides being an editor, I'm also a scholar as well. I work in the field of eco-criticism and Pacific literary criticism mostly. And so for the lit nerds in the room, I wanted to recommend a couple pieces that I have. One was in the journal Humanities. They did a special issue on world literature and the blue humanities. The blue humanities referring to humanities works about the ocean or water, also sometimes called hydrocriticism, looking at how water is represented in texts, and of course how texts are shaped by water. And so I have an essay in there. And then there was a special issue of English language notes from 2020 called Indigenous Narratives of Territory and Creation. And so for those of you interested in Native literature, this is a great special issue. I have also an essay in there. And then my own monograph, Navigating Chamorro Poetry, Indigeneity, Aesthetics, and Decolonization. Actually, I'm kind of just plugging this because it was just published in January. And so I'm very, very excited about this book. The first chapter does focus on Chamorro eco-feminist poetry. And so it does relate to it, but mostly I just wanted to share it since it's brand new. The second project I'm working on, or my second book, is a title on the bottom. It's called Pacific Islander Eco Poetry, Indigenous Knowledge, Environmental Justice, and Climate Change. And in this monograph, I'm moving beyond my own people's poetry and looking at least the American occupied Pacific. So looking at poetry by Hawaiians, Marshallese, Samoans, and Pohnpeians. And so looking at poetry from around our region. Now, some of the arguments I make in this new book is thinking about Pacific eco-poetry and how it expresses Indigenous Islander ecological knowledge, wisdom, and customs, how it foregrounds our interconnection, kinship, and genealogical ties with the ocean, land, and more than human species, highlights the Indigenous histories and names of places, and then re-narrates and connects us to the sacredness of the earth, and of course, how it can critique and protest ecological imperialism, such as militarism, nuclearism, tourism, as well as the impacts of climate change. So that's kind of my main argument. And then I'm also throughout this next book, thinking about what this kind of poetry does, right? So I'm arguing that it can educate readers on environmental issues. So thinking about poetry as a creative way to teach environmental literacy, how it humanizes climate communication, info, and data, how it inspires and empowers islanders to protect and defend our lands and waters. So it kind of has an activist dimension. And it invites non-Pacific Islanders to empathize with and support the struggles of the Pacific. So that's kind of a solidarity dimension. Helps us reckon with eco-anxiety as mourning and perhaps even healing. And lastly, how it can imagine a decolonized and sustainable future for the next generation. Sorry about that. So that's my other part of my argument for my next work. Okay, and then lastly, I'm also a poet. That's my main passion. And I have 5 books so far. The first 4 of those books, you can see lined up here, are mostly about Guam and the struggles of my home island. And the environmental justice element is a major theme, though I also write about family, culture, history, and of course, migration, diaspora, since that's part of my experience. But what I'm going to actually read from today is from my newest book called Habitat Threshold. And this is a collection entirely of eco-poetry, addressing different elements of ecology and climate change. And before I jump into the reading, I wanted to share a little bit about this cover. And you can see the top, or the front cover, it's a triptych. The top is a kind of inverted image of calving glaciers in the Arctic. The bottom part is of smoke and fires in California, which is where my family still lives. And then the middle picture is actually a photo I took. It's of my dad taking my first daughter to meet the ocean in Hawaii for the first time. So really love having that family picture there. And in the back cover, you can see in the background is a picture of a plastic. And that actually was a photo taken here in Hawaii after beach cleanup and all the plastic debris. All right, so that ends that part of the presentation. I'm now going to turn to my poetry reading from these poems in Habitat Threshold. Okay, so this first poem relates to one of the images on the cover. It's called Age of Plastic. The doctor presses the plastic probe against my pregnant wife's belly. Plastic leaches estrogenic and toxic chemicals. Ultrasound waves pulse between plastic, tissue, fluid, and bone until the embryo echoes. Plastic makes this possible. My wife labors at home in an inflatable plastic tub. Plastic disrupts hormonal and endocrine systems. After delivery, she stores her placenta in a plastic freezer bag. Plastic is the perfect creation because it never dies. Our daughter sucks on a plastic pacifier. Whales, plankton, shrimp, and birds confuse plastic for food. The plastic pump whirls, breast milk drips into a plastic bottle. Plastic keeps food, water, and medicine fresh. Yet, how empty plastic must feel to be birthed, used, then disposed by us, degrading creators. In the oceans, 1 ton of plastic exists for every 3 tons of fish. How free plastic must feel when it finally arrives to the paradise of the Pacific Gyre. Will plastic make life impossible? Our daughter falls asleep in a plastic crib, and I dream that she's composed of plastic, so that she too will survive our wasteful hands. Okay, the second poem is called Rings of Fire. We host our daughter's first birthday party during the hottest April in history. Outside, my dad grills meat over charcoal. Inside, my mom steams rice and roasts vegetables. They've traveled from California, where drought carves trees into tinder. Paradise is burning. When our daughter's first fever spiked, the doctor said it's a sign she's fighting infection. Bloodshed surges with global temperatures, which know no borders. If her fever doesn't break, the doctor continued, take her to the emergency room. Airstrikes detonate hospitals in Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, South Sudan. When she crowned, my wife said, it felt like rings of fire. Volcanoes erupt along Pacific fault lines. Sweltering heat waves scorch Australia. Forests in Indonesia are raised for palm oil plantations. Their ashes flock like ghost birds to our distant rib cages. Still, I crave an unfiltered cigarette, even though I quit years ago and my breath no longer smells like my grandpa's overflowing ashtray. His parched cough still punctures the black lungs of cancer and denial. If she struggles to breathe, the doctor advised, give her an asthma inhaler. Tonight, we sing happy birthday and blow out the candles together. Smoke trembles as if we all exhaled the same flammable wish. Okay, this next poem is called Care, and it was written for an event we had here in Hawaii a couple of years ago in support of or to raise money for the Syrian refugee crisis. So I wanted to share this poem today, given all the other refugee crises happening in Eastern Europe and around the world. Care. Our daughter wakes from her nap and cries. I pick her up, press her against my chest and whisper, Daddy's here, Daddy's here. Here is the island of Oahu, 8,500 miles from Syria. But what if Pacific trade winds suddenly became flames and shrapnel indiscriminately barreling towards us? What if shadows cast upon our windows aren't plumeria tree branches, but soldiers and terrorists marching? Daddy's here, I whisper. Would we reach the Mediterranean in time? Am I strong enough to straighten my legs into a mast, balanced with the pull and drift of the currents? Am I brave enough to bear her across the razor wires of foreign countries and racial hatred? Could I plead, please help us? Please just let us pass. Please, we aren't suicide bombs. Could I keep walking if my feet crack like halabi pepper fields after 5 years of drought, after this drought of humanity? Daddy's here, Daddy's here. Trains and buses rock back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to detention centers. But what if our desperate boat capsizes? Could I inflate my body into a buoy to hold her above rough waves? Daddy's here, Daddy. Will drowning be the last lullaby of the sea? Or will we carry each other towards the horizon of care? Just have two more poems. This next one is called The Last Safe Habitat, and it's dedicated to a native Hawaiian bird called the Kauai, which is a kind of honey creeper. The last safe habitat. I don't want our daughter to know that Hawaii is the bird extinction capital of the world. I don't want her to walk around the island feeling haunted by tree roots buried under concrete. I don't want her to fear the invasive predators who slither, pounce, bite, swallow, disease, and multiply. I don't want her to see paintings and photographs of birds she'll never witness in the wild. I don't want her to imagine their bones in dark museum drawers. I don't want her to hear their voice recordings on the internet. I don't want her to draw a timeline with the years each was first collected and last cited. I don't want her to learn about the Kauai, who was observed atop a flowering ohia tree, calling for a mate day after day, season after season, because he didn't know he was the last of his kind. Until one day, he disappeared forever into a nest of avian silence. I don't want our daughter to calculate how many miles of fencing is needed to protect the endangered birds that remain. I don't want her to realize the most serious causes of extinction can't be fenced out. I want to convince her that extinction is not the end. I want to convince her that extinction is just a migration to the last safe habitat on Earth. I want to convince her that our winged relatives have arrived to their destination, a wondrous island with a climate we can never change, and a rainforest fertile with seeds and song. Thank you again for listening. It was my last poem, and looking forward to our conversation after. This poem is called Chanting the Waters, and it was written several years ago. We also had an event here in Hawaii in solidarity with Standing Rock. And so I wrote this poem to perform at this event to kind of show my solidarity with those water protectors and kind of make connections between various water struggles in North America and the Pacific and around the world. Chanting the waters. Water is life because our bodies are 60% water. Because my wife labored for 24 hours through contracting waves. Because water breaks forth from shifting tectonic plates. Water is life because amniotic fluid is 90% water. Because she breathed and breathed and breathed. Because our lungs are 80% water. Because our daughter crowned like a new island. Water is life because we tell creation stories about water, because our language flows from water, because our words are islands writ on water, because it takes 3 gallons of water to make a single sheet of paper. Water is life because water is the next oil, because 180,000 miles of US oil pipelines leak every day, because we wage war over gods and water and oil. Water is life because our planet is 70% water, because it takes 2 gallons of water to refine a gallon of gasoline. It takes 20 gallons of water to make a pound of plastic. It takes 600 gallons of water to make 1 hamburger, because the average American water footprint is 2,000 gallons a day. Water is life because a billion people lack access to clean drinking water, because women and children walk 4 miles every day to gather clean water and deliver it home. Water is life, because corporations privatize, dam, and bottle our waters, because plantations divert our waters, because animal slaughterhouses consume our waters, because pesticides, chemicals, lead, and waste poison our waters. Water is life, because they bring their bulldozers and drills and drones, because we bring our feathers and lei and sage and shells and canoes and hashtags and totems, because they call us savage and primitive and riot, because we bring our treaties and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because they bring their banks and politicians and dogs and paychecks and pepper spray and bullets, because we bring our songs and schools and prayers and chants and ceremonies, because we say stop, keep the oil in the ground, because they say shut up and vanish, because we are not moving, because we bring all our relations and all our generations and all our live streams. Water is life, because our drumming sounds like rain after drought echoing against taut skin, because our skin is 60% water. Water is life, because every year millions of children die from waterborne diseases, because every day thousands of children die from waterborne diseases, because by the end of this poem, 5 children will die from waterborne diseases. Water is life, because our daughter loves playing in the ocean, because someday she'll ask, where does the ocean end? Because we'll point to the dilating horizon. Water is life, because our eyes are 95% water, because we'll tell her ocean has no end, because sky and clouds lift ocean, because mountains embrace ocean into blessings of rain, because ocean, sky, rain fills aquifers and lakes, because ocean, sky, rain, lake flows into the Missouri River, because ocean, sky, rain, lake, river returns to the Pacific and connects us to our cousins at Standing Rock, because our blood is 90% water. Water is life, because our hearts are 75% water. So I'll teach our daughter our people's word for water, Hanum, Hanum, Hanum. So the sound of water will always carry her home. Water is life. Water is life. Water is life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again for listening.
Thanks, Craig. We have some time for questions. If you're in the audience, you can just raise your hand and we have mic runners that'll bring the mic to you. If you're on Zoom, I will be checking for Zoom questions as well. So do we have any questions?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your poetry, which was so powerful and compelling. And I wanted to ask about what it has been like to bring art and poetry to spaces that don't necessarily use those mediums to talk about issues. So, for example, the UN Fourth Committee or conversations around demilitarization and decolonization. I would love to hear a little bit more about what it's like to be an artist in that space, and challenges, but also successes.
Yes, thank you for your question. At first, it was definitely very awkward, just because I'm so used to performing, in front of literary audiences, folks that show up to hear poetry. And so it was strange at first. But, the more I did, the more I was able to witness how poetry can kind of cut through a lot of, political rhetoric or scientific data or other kinds of, talking points, And and so for me, you know, as soon as I start performing in these spaces, I could kind of see people pay more attention, and you know, they can hear the language is being used differently, in terms of like poetic language being much more, you know, compressed and meaningful in some ways. And so, you know, beyond that, I've also felt like it brings a deeper emotional resonance to these discussions that perhaps you wouldn't get, you know, at a different kind of presentation. And so, you know, for me, I see a lot of people kind of transformed emotionally in these spaces, especially because they're not expecting to feel those emotions in these kinds of meetings and things like that. And so, you know, sometimes that has even led people to start crying at certain events, which I'm sure they weren't anticipating, and you know, to kind of think more emotionally and kind of have that deeper human experience, beyond, you know, what folks are used to. So that's kind of the success. And the challenge is like I said, at least for me, getting over that awkwardness and really being able to kind of bring an audience into those types of experiences.
Dr. Perez, thank you so much. It's been just an absolute honor to see the joy and emotion that you clearly bring to your work, both like talking about upcoming publications and events, but then also obviously hearing that passion in your poetry. So just wanted to say thank you for that and ask for, if you would, maybe a touch of advice of this space. I think is often one of the prior question that does not incorporate poetry and art relatively regularly. I think, you know, at least in my studies, and I think many students here, environmental problems become a pretty sterilized space that is often viewed through, you know, spreadsheets much more than poetry. And so any advice you could give to folks who are in the environmental space through a more, you know, quantitative lens, how do we keep this type of humanity in mind, whether that's, you know, reading a poem every night, going to literary circles, any advice you'd be willing to share? Thank you.
Thanks for your kind words and that question. Yeah, it's a great point. I think, you know, for me, one thing that I really appreciate about the environmental and climate justice movement, especially here in Hawaii, is how creative it is. And there always seems to be collaboration between scientists, conservationists, and artists, musicians, poets, and in the case of Hawaii, even, you know, like hula dancers and other traditional artisans. And you know, so for my advice always is to try to tap into, you know, your own creativity. Definitely, if you're organizing an event or a conference, you know, to see if you can include the arts, music, and the humanities. So I think it does bring a much needed creative and emotional element to any discussion. And of course, if you're an educator as well, to try to bring that into the classroom. And I experienced this myself, where the humanities is a really fun and creative way to still teach environmental literacy, but in a way that can be more engaging beyond spreadsheets. And so that's just a little bit of advice I have. And then of course, maybe even if you're not a poet, you know, keep a journal. And I know if you're a scientist, you know, you're feeling things too, despite your objectivity. And so to give yourself that space to express your own emotions that you have, you know, from your research, and not saying you have to go and you know, perform at the open mic, but at least where you can really nourish those emotions and help, you know, as I said before, help mourn and heal and reckon with everything you might be experiencing within you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Buenas and off day, Dr. Perez, Guahusi Kyra. I'm also born and raised on Guam, and I'm off island here in New Haven for law school. I had a couple questions for you. So like one, and these are things that I personally struggle with, so I wanted to pick your brain. One is like, what are things that you do to intentionally stay in community with the people back home while you're in the diaspora? And also, like, I noticed that you used imagery in your poems that aren't necessarily ours, like feathers and like Hawaiian flowers and stuff like that. So something that I've been struggling with lately is how do you grapple with being a settler on other occupied lands, like lands occupied by the same colonizer, and how does that inform your work? Sainamasi.
Oh, well, half a day. I have to ask, what village are you from?
I'm from Jigo, but my family's from Lesut and Zonia.
Well, so wonderful to see you tomorrow out there in Yonne. I hope I hope you're staying warm.
Oh God, it's hard.
Always nice to see our people thriving in various institutions, and I hope your studies are going well. Definitely for me, for that last question, that's something that I really was able to think about in California. I went to Berkeley in their ethnic studies program and studied with a lot of Native American faculty, as well as our Pacific Islander graduate student alliance. We collaborated a lot with the Native American student groups, and thinking about both our shared struggles and kind of similar cultural customs, but also, as you say, thinking about what it means to be Pacific Islander settlers in California, in that case on Ohlone lands. And at least for me, part of that meant, of course, standing in solidarity with their own struggles for land back and sovereignty and environmental justice. And so, I was able to stand with a lot of Native American struggles there. And since then, I've been doing a lot of solidarity work, especially in the realm of Native literature and thinking about those trans-Indigenous solidarities. And similar, when I moved here in Hawaii, to kind of, again, make connections with the Hawaiian movement, and, to also think about, the role that our people have as settlers here in Hawaii. As you probably know, most of Chamorros here in Hawaii are part of the military. And so, thinking about our own complicity within US empire as kind of, continue to drive my work in terms of kind of critiquing militarism. Beyond that, in terms of, how to thrive in these kinds of spaces, definitely, at least for me, in California, I had, of course, lots of family. Unlike Connecticut, there's lots of Chamorros in California, and lots of cultural clubs and many Mes Chamorro events right now during March. And similar here in Hawaii, plenty of Chamorros here too. And, for me, I've been involved in many Chamorro events. And I think for me, it's always most special when I get to perform my work in front of our own people and to kind of share our stories. I didn't read any of those poems today, but definitely I just try to stay connected in the diaspora, and then I have a lot of friends back home still that are part of the movement, so I try to support when I can and go back home as much as possible. I haven't been able since the pandemic, but usually I try to go back every couple of years and do some events back home and for the community. But Sanamasi for your question, and good luck the rest of your time there.
Hagumas, hagumas.
Hi, thank you so much for your incredibly moving words and your lyrical narrative. I apologize, I may have missed your discussion because I had to miss the first quarter hour of your presentation, but I did want to ask you about any influence, and I know I'm dating myself here, but of W.S. Merwin may have had. I know I've only visited Hawaii one time, but his epic poem, The Folding Cliffs, was very influential on my understanding of Hawaii. And his translation of his lyrical sensibility to activism was also very moving and inspirational to me. And I'm wondering if that's been at all influential on any of your work. The late W.S. Merwin, he died recently, but his work lives on in that incredible restoration project. So I just wonder if you could address that a little bit.
Yes, thank you so much. For those who don't know, it's W.S. Merwin, very famous American poet, ended up settling here in Hawaii, purchased some land in Maui, and started to raise palms. And now the land was converted into a conservancy, and they have a literary center there. And I've actually collaborated several times with that organization, really wonderful people who work there, looking at the intersection of poetry and the environment. I actually got to meet Merwin a couple times. We actually did perform together once, and that was really fun. We both ended up reading poems about birds, and so that was really a special moment, because his work was really influential to me when I was a younger poet. And like you said, his kind of keen eye for the natural world, his lyricism, and to me his sense of his kind of like eco-literary consciousness, in a way where he was able to see the interconnectedness of things and express it in his poetry in a way that was that really just cut right to the heart. That's probably what I would say was really influential to me, more, and especially his poems about birds, especially, were really meaningful. But yeah, definitely his loss was a great loss for of course, the national literary community as well.
Thank you, Dr. Santos Perez. This wonderful talk. I think we're out of time now. We have a new class coming in, and you'll be joining some of the students for dinner tonight. So we're looking forward to that. So thank you. Everyone else, when you file out, there's a few sandwiches out there, so feel free to take one or two. And some of you we'll see you tonight. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll see you.